If this book has found you tonight, know that it is no accident the universe is ready for you, ready to bend to your will. As you listen, you'll uncover the truth. Nothing about this moment is random, and the power to command your reality has always been yours. The universe is waiting. Now is the time to claim it. Introduction. Nothing that has led you to this exact moment, listening to these words in this particular hour of this particular night, was ever truly accidental. Every small delay, every unexpected turn, every quiet decision that seemed, at the time, to mean nothing at all, has been quietly arranging itself, thread by careful thread, to bring you here to this teaching, at this hour, ready to hear what you are about to hear. You have been taught, across the whole of your life, by voices that meant well but knew no better, that the universe is indifferent to you, a vast and silent machine, turning according to its own blind laws, entirely unconcerned with your hopes, your fears, your quiet and private longings. You have been taught that what happens to you is simply what happens, that coincidence is coincidence, and nothing more, that to imagine otherwise is the wishful thinking of a mind unwilling to accept a cold and impersonal world. This teaching has kept you distant from something that has been waiting, patiently and without complaint, this entire time. The universe is not indifferent. It has never been indifferent. It is, in truth, far closer to a living response than a fixed and silent machine, a vast and intelligent reflection, continually answering back whatever is offered to it in feeling and in thought. Whether that offering is made deliberately or entirely by careless habit, it does not judge what is offered to it. It does not withhold its answer out of malice or caprice. It simply responds, faithfully and without exception, to the quiet signal you have been sending outward your entire life, whether or not you ever thought to notice you were sending anything at all. What follows in the pages ahead is not a request that you learn to force the world into some new and unnatural shape through effort and struggle. It is, instead, an invitation to remember a forgotten relationship, one between yourself and the unseen forces that surround you, a relationship that has been waiting quietly, without impatience, for you to learn its proper language. That language, as you will come to see, is not the language of demand, nor of desperate pleading, nor even of carefully chosen words recited without conviction. It is the language of feeling, held quietly and sincerely, and it is a language you have always been capable of speaking, even in the years you never thought to try. You will learn, across the teachings that follow, that asking need not be difficult, that receiving need not be earned through suffering or struggle, that the universe, rightly understood, is not something to be begged or bargained with from a great and fearful distance, but something to be aligned with, quietly and steadily, the way a sail aligns itself with a wind already blowing. Release now whatever belief you may still carry that the universe is cold or indifferent or separate from your own inner life. That belief was given to you. It was never truly discovered by you, and it need not be carried any further than this moment. Enter what follows, with open and receptive attention, for the universe has been listening this whole time, and it is, at last, ready to answer. The teachings of Part 1 await you now. Act 1. The universe is already listening. Chapter 1. No accident brought you here. Everett Caldwell worked the docks of a busy harbour town, rising each morning before the sun to begin the long hours of loading and unloading cargo that filled his days. One particular morning, hurrying toward his usual post, he found his cartwheel had come loose overnight, splitting cleanly from its axle in a way that made any immediate repair impossible. He cursed his misfortune under his breath, certain this delay would cost him wages he could ill afford to lose, and spent a frustrating hour securing a replacement wheel from a neighbor before finally setting out for the docks, considerably later than his usual hour. He arrived to find the harbor in chaos. An old warehouse, the very one he would ordinarily have entered first that morning to begin his work, had collapsed suddenly in the early hours, its rotted beams finally giving way under the weight of stored grain. 3 men who had arrived on time were injured in the wreckage. Everett, delayed by his broken wheel, had not yet reached the building when it fell. Every step leading to this present moment, however small or seemingly inconvenient it appeared at the time, was already part of the universe quietly preparing to answer the one who would eventually notice it. Nothing arrives by true accident, however much it may resemble accident to the mind still learning to see the larger pattern at work behind it. Not far from the same harbor, a woman named Millicent Hargrove cursed a missed train one gray morning as pure and simple misfortune, standing on the platform watching it pull away without her, furious at her own poor timing. She never once suspected, storming home in frustration, that this same missed train was quietly steering her away from a difficult meeting that would have gone badly for her, and toward an unexpected conversation with an old acquaintance she encountered later that same afternoon, a conversation that led, in time, to an opportunity she could never have anticipated. Consider a recent inconvenience of your own, one that frustrated or delayed you in some ordinary way, and wonder, gently and without forcing an answer, what quiet purpose it may have served that you have not yet had the chance to see clearly. Practice. Tonight, identify one past accident from your own life, a delay, a missed opportunity, an inconvenience that frustrated you at the time, and consider it now, for the first time, as something meaningful rather than random, offering it your open curiosity rather than your old and settled frustration. Chapter 2. The Universe as a Living Response. Harold Bixby kept a small inn along a quiet coastal road, greeting travelers of every disposition who passed through his doors, the weary, the cheerful, the irritable, the kind. Over many years of careful observation, he began to notice something curious about the tone of his guests. Night after night, it seemed, with uncanny and rather unsettling consistency, to mirror his own mood on any given evening. On nights he felt warm and unhurried. His guests seemed to arrive warm and unhurried in turn, settling easily into their rooms, offering pleasant conversation over supper. On nights he felt tired and short-tempered. His guests, without any obvious cause, seemed to arrive short-tempered as well, finding fault with their rooms, complaining of trivial inconveniences he would ordinarily never have heard mentioned. The world behaves less like a fixed and indifferent machine, grinding forward according to laws entirely separate from the one observing it, and more like a living response, continually and faithfully reflecting back the inner state carried by the one who meets it each day. Constance Whitfield, a woman of considerable practical sense, assumed for most of her life that her outward circumstances were entirely separate from her private inner life, that her finances, her relationships, her daily fortunes rose and fell according to causes wholly unrelated to her own thoughts and feelings. She was genuinely startled, once she finally began paying careful attention to the pattern, to notice how closely her circumstances seemed to track her own private moods, arriving calm when she was calm, and troubled when she was troubled, far too consistently to be dismissed any longer as simple coincidence. Consider your own circumstances in this present moment, not as a fixed and separate fact standing entirely apart from you, but as a living response, continually and faithfully reflecting back whatever inner state you have been carrying, whether or not you have thought before now to examine it closely. Practice. Tonight, notice one way your own outer day may have been responding to your inner state a mood, mirrored back to you by a stranger, a small event that seemed to match your private feeling before it ever occurred outwardly. Chapter 3. Why the Universe Has Been Waiting. Thomas Ainsley tended a modest orchard on a gentle hillside, and understood, from long years spent among his trees, that fruit ripens only once the tree itself has been properly and patiently tended, watered through dry seasons, protected through frost, pruned with care through many quiet years, and never a single day before that patient tending has been completed, however eager the orchard keeper himself might privately become for an early harvest. The universe has always stood ready to bend in the reader's favor, waiting not out of any withholding or reluctance on its part, but simply for the reader to learn how to ask, in the manner it is genuinely able to answer, a manner built on feeling and alignment rather than desperate demand. Nathaniel Cobb, a laborer in the same valley as Thomas, grew steadily more frustrated, waiting for some response to his many hopes and prayers that never seemed to arrive, wondering bitterly why the universe seemed so silent toward him in particular, never once realizing that he had simply not yet learned the proper and receptive manner of asking that might have opened the very door he stood so impatiently before. Consider whether you, too, have been waiting on the universe to answer some long-held hope, without first learning its particular and gentle manner of response, a manner built not on frequency or volume of asking, but on sincerity and quiet feeling. Practice. Tonight, state one clear request, simply and sincerely, while consciously releasing any frustration you may carry about its timing, trusting that the season of its ripening will arrive exactly as it needs to. Chapter 4. The Language the Universe Understands. Margaret Ellery spoke hopeful words about her future each day, rehearsing pleasant possibilities aloud to herself and to anyone who would listen, while inwardly, beneath those very same hopeful words, feeling only doubt and quiet uncertainty about whether any of it could truly come to pass. She wondered, with growing frustration, why her circumstances never seemed to match the hopeful words she spoke so faithfully and so often. The universe does not respond to words alone, however carefully chosen or however frequently repeated, but to the vibration of feeling held quietly behind them, so that spoken hope offered without true and matching feeling produces remarkably little real change in the circumstances it hopes to influence. Joseph Kettering, by contrast, spoke very little of his own hopes to anyone, offering few words at all about his ambitions or his private desires, and yet carried within him a quiet and steady feeling of confidence that seemed, through some means he could never quite explain to others, to shape his circumstances far more powerfully than any amount of hopeful speech ever could on its own. Consider whether your own words have been genuinely matched by true feeling held sincerely behind them, or spoken instead hollowly against an undercurrent of doubt that quietly contradicts everything the words themselves claim to hope for. Practice. Tonight, generate true and genuine feeling behind one spoken hope of your own, holding that feeling in your body rather than merely repeating the words themselves. Chapter 5. The Illusion of a Random World. Charlie Dunmore assumed, as many do, that the repeated misfortunes scattered throughout his life were simply bad luck, an unfortunate but entirely random string of coincidences that had nothing whatsoever to do with him personally, arriving and departing according to no pattern he could ever hope to discern or influence. What appears to be mere chance is, more often than most are ever taught to consider, the quiet reflection of an inner pattern not yet noticed by the very one experiencing its outward effects, a pattern repeating itself faithfully in circumstance because it has never once been examined or released at its true source. Ruth Callahan began tracing her own repeated coincidences, a string of similar disappointments in her working life, a recurring pattern of being overlooked for opportunities she felt she deserved, back to a consistent inner pattern of self-doubt she had never before thought to recognize clearly, a private belief about her own limitations that had been quietly shaping her outward circumstances for years without her ever once suspecting the connection. Consider a repeated pattern in your own life, one that has occurred often enough that it can no longer be easily dismissed as mere chance, and consider gently what inner pattern it may, in truth, be quietly reflecting back to you. Practice. Tonight, identify one recurring coincidence in your own life, and consider the inner pattern it may be reflecting, naming it honestly to yourself without judgment. Chapter 6. Your Signal to the Infinite. Abigail Sutter, a farmer's wife of quiet and reflective temperament, he began to notice over many seasons that her clearest and most heartfelt thoughts, the ones held with genuine feeling rather than idle distraction, seemed to arrive answered far more often than her scattered, half-hearted wishes ever did, as though the universe itself could somehow distinguish between a signal sent with true conviction and one sent merely out of habit. Every thought and feeling held, whether deliberately chosen or offered through careless and unexamined habit, sends a signal outward that the universe faithfully and consistently answers in kind, matching whatever quality of signal it has been given without exception or favoritism. Franklin Odell, a neighbor of Abigail's, sent out constant and scattered signals of worry and complaint throughout his ordinary days, grumbling about his circumstances at every turn, dwelling on each small disappointment as though rehearsing it for some private audience, and found his days answering those very signals with an uncanny and rather unwelcome precision, delivering him fresh disappointments to match his fresh complaints. Consider what signal you have been sending outward most consistently across your own ordinary days, a signal of worry and complaint, as Franklin so often was, or a signal of clear and heartfelt intention, as Abigail gradually learned to send. Practice. Today, send one clear and deliberate signal outward, a single sincere thought or feeling, held with real conviction rather than idle habit. Chapter 7. The universe does not judge, only reflects. Silas Whitcomb, an old farmer of long and patient experience, understood well that soil returns exactly what is planted within it, without any judgment whatsoever for whether the seed sown was wise or foolish, wanted or unwanted. The soil simply and faithfully produces whatever has been given to it, offering neither praise nor blame for the planting. The universe withholds no judgment on what is asked of it, offering no moral verdict on the worthiness of any particular request, but simply reflects back whatever is truly and consistently held within the one asking, whether that inner holding proves helpful or harmful to the asker's own genuine well-being. Bertha Lindquist blamed the universe itself, quite bitterly, for her ongoing misfortune, cursing what she considered its unfairness and its apparent cruelty toward her in particular, never once considering that it had simply been reflecting, faithfully and without malice, her own long-held inner state of resentment and expectation of further misfortune, offered back to her without judgment either way. Release any belief you may still carry that the universe judges you, whether favorably or unfavorably, and focus your attention instead on what you are truly and consistently holding within, for this alone is what determines what you receive in return. Practice. Tonight, consider one belief you currently hold that the universe may simply be reflecting back to you faithfully, without any judgment attached to it either way. Chapter 8. Undoing the Belief in a Cold Universe. Louisa Marsh was raised, from her very earliest years, to believe the world a harsh and indifferent place, one that must be fought against, and merely endured rather than trusted or cooperated with in any genuine sense. Quite late in her own life, sitting quietly one evening with this old and familiar belief, she began to wonder, for the very first time, whether it had ever truly been her own belief at all, or whether it had simply been handed to her, fully formed, by parents who themselves had never known anything gentler to pass along. Believing the universe to be cold or hostile is itself an inherited belief rather than any genuine and lasting truth, and this particular belief, however comfortingly familiar it may have become through long repetition, quietly repels the very cooperation it insists, with such weary certainty, will never come to pass. Amos Whitfield released this same old belief one determined evening, choosing instead to assume a friendly and cooperative universe, willing to work alongside him rather than against him, and noticed, within a matter of weeks, a gentle warmth entering his circumstances that had simply not been present during all his years of assuming the opposite. Trace your own belief about the universe's fundamental nature back to its true origin, honestly and without flinching, and consider whether it still genuinely serves the life you now wish, with such sincere hope, to build for yourself. Practice. Tonight, consciously replace a belief in a cold and indifferent universe with one of quiet and genuine cooperation, offering yourself this new belief gently, as a fresh and welcome possibility. Chapter 9. Aligning with the current, not against it. Daniel Prescott, a young riverman working the busy waterways near his home, exhausted himself one difficult afternoon, rowing determinedly against a strong and unyielding current, straining every muscle in his back and his arms, never once considering the far simpler alternative of turning his small boat and allowing the same current to carry him easily downstream instead. Life grows effortless the very moment one aligns with the universe's own natural current, instead of struggling anxiously against it through constant and exhausting force, for the current, rightly understood, was never truly the enemy it appeared to be during all those years of futile rowing against it. Clara Bishop ceased her own constant striving against circumstance one weary season, choosing instead to gently align her thoughts with ease rather than resistance, and found her efforts suddenly carried forward with a surprising and rather gratifying speed, as though some unseen current had simply been waiting, this whole time, for her to stop rowing against it. Consider where in your own life you may currently be rowing determinedly against a current that would, if only you allowed it, carry you forward freely and without such exhausting effort. Practice. Tonight, identify one area of struggle in your own life and consciously choose ease instead, however unfamiliar that choice may feel to you in the moment. Chapter 10. Your first request, the universe cannot refuse. Edwin Talmadge, a young orchard keeper of quiet and patient temperament, made one sincere and deeply felt request of the coming season, not a scattered or half-hearted wish, but a single clear intention, held with genuine feeling, and tended his trees afterward with calm and confident expectation, rather than the anxious doubt that had troubled his earlier seasons of planting. A single, sincere request, clearly felt and released without desperate grasping, marks the very moment the universe begins to visibly and unmistakably respond, for sincerity and genuine feeling carry far more true weight than mere repetition or volume ever could on their own. Wallace Pruitt, a doubting neighbor of Edwin's, made many scattered and half-hearted requests throughout each season, never once truly feeling any of them with real conviction, offering them more out of habit than sincere hope, and wondered, with growing frustration, why none of his many requests ever seemed to be genuinely answered. Consider the real difference between a scattered wish, offered without true feeling, and one sincere and deeply felt request, offered fully and then released. Practice. To close this first part of your journey, make one clear, sincere request to the universe tonight, fully felt before you let it go entirely, trusting it now to its own unhurried and natural unfolding. Act 2. The Sacred Practices of Bending the Universe. Chapter 11. The Receptive Hour. Homer Fairweather, a night watchman who spent long hours alone through the quiet darkness of his working shifts, discovered that his own quiet hour, just before sleep, once his shift had ended and he lay finally at rest, left him unusually open and impressionable in a way his busier daylight hours, filled with duty and distraction, never quite managed to match. There is a quiet hour each day in which the universe listens most closely of all, and few ever learn to recognize or to deliberately use this receptive window that presents itself faithfully and without fail to every person alive, whether or not they ever think to notice it. Vera Applegate filled this same quiet hour each night with restless worry instead, tossing and turning over her many concerns rather than resting in quiet receptivity, never once realizing the precious opportunity she wasted, night after night, by filling it with anxious thought rather than deliberate and sincere request. Notice your own quiet hour, whenever it arrives in your own daily rhythm, and consider what you have been allowing to occupy it until this very evening. Practice. Tonight, identify your own quiet, receptive hour and fill it with one deliberate request, offered sincerely into the stillness rather than left to restless and unattended worry. Chapter 12. Asking as though it is already yours. Augustus Hartwell began asking for ease and abundance not from a place of anxious lack, rehearsing all the ways he currently fell short, but from the calm and settled feeling of one who already possessed what was being asked for, holding that quiet confidence as though the matter were already simply resolved. Asking from the feeling of already having, rather than from the feeling of lacking and striving after something still absent, is what the universe responds to most readily and most swiftly of all the approaches available to the sincere seeker. Percival Dodd asked constantly from a place of anxious and persistent lack, his every request colored by the very scarcity he hoped to escape, and found his requests met again and again. With precisely the same lack, he continued, quite unconsciously, to feel beneath his own words. Notice whether your own requests tend to arise from a feeling of having calm and settled, or a feeling of lacking, anxious and unsettled, as Percival so often did. Practice. Tonight, ask for one desire from the feeling of already possessing it, holding that quiet confidence gently rather than straining towards something still felt as absent. Chapter 13. The Prayer of Feeling, Not Words. Josephine Carter recited the very same hopeful words each night before sleep, faithfully and without fail, and yet wondered, with growing puzzlement, why her circumstances remained so entirely unmoved, despite her considerable and consistent effort at repetition. It is the feeling beneath a request, far more than its precise or carefully chosen wording, that the universe truly receives and faithfully answers, for words alone, however elegant, carry little weight without the genuine feeling that must accompany them. Elmer Griggs spoke very few words at all in his own private practice, offering barely a sentence some evenings, but held beneath that simplicity a deep and quiet feeling of trust that seemed, through means he could never fully explain, to shift his circumstances more readily and more completely than the elaborate and eloquent prayers of far more articulate seekers around him. Consider whether your own requests have carried true and genuine feeling within them, or only well-chosen and carefully rehearsed words offered without the deeper conviction that truly moves the universe to respond. Practice. Tonight, generate genuine feeling behind a single, silent request, holding it quietly within yourself without needing to speak it aloud at all. Chapter 14. Releasing the Request to the Infinite. Delphine Hargrove made a heartfelt and sincere request one evening, offering it with genuine feeling, but then continued anxiously checking for its arrival each and every day that followed, watching for signs, growing frustrated at each day's apparent silence, unknowingly delaying its natural arrival through her own tight and anxious grip upon it. Once a request is fully and sincerely felt and offered, gripping it further through anxious checking and constant watchfulness only delays its natural and unhurried arrival, for anxious grasping signals doubt rather than the calm trust that allows an answer to unfold freely. Cornelius Beadle made his own request one quiet evening, and then released it entirely, turning his attention back to his ordinary days without further anxious checking, and found his answer arriving with a surprising and rather welcome ease, as though his very release had cleared the way for it to arrive unhindered. Consider whether you have been gripping too tightly to a request already sincerely made, watching anxiously for its arrival rather than trusting it now to its own unhurried unfolding. Practice. Tonight, practice a brief releasing exercise for one request you have been anxiously holding on to, offering it fully to the universe and then consciously turning your attention elsewhere. Chapter 15. Reading the Universe's Replies. Rosalind Fenwick began noticing small and rather unlikely coincidences appearing in her life shortly after she made her own sincere requests, though she very nearly dismissed each one as unrelated chance, unworthy of any particular notice or significance. The universe often replies first in small nudges and quiet signs, long before any larger and more obvious event unfolds to confirm its response. And learning to notice these small replies strengthens considerably the trust that draws forth still more of the same in the days that follow. Herbert Yancey dismissed every small sign that appeared in his own life as entirely meaningless, mere unremarkable coincidence, unworthy of his attention, and so failed to nourish the very trust that would otherwise have carried his own sincere requests much further along their natural path. Consider what small replies may already be appearing in your own life since you last made a sincere request, replies you may have been too quick to dismiss as simple chance. Practice. Tonight, note one small sign you have noticed since making a recent request, however minor or ordinary it may at first appear to you. Chapter 16. Removing the Static of Fear. Wendell Ashcroft made a sincere and heartfelt request each night before sleep, offering it with genuine feeling, but allowed fear of its potential failure to creep in almost immediately afterward, quietly scrambling the very signal he had only just sent outward with such sincerity. Fear held toward an outcome acts as a kind of static that scrambles the request being sent outward into the world, weakening its clarity considerably, and delaying whatever answer might otherwise have arrived more swiftly and more cleanly. Adelaide Crum noticed her own fear arising predictably after each request she made, and gently set it aside each time it appeared, refusing to let it linger or take root, and found her results growing steadily clearer and considerably swifter as a direct result of this simple and consistent practice. Notice any fear that follows your own requests, and consider how it may be quietly scrambling the very signal you have worked so sincerely to send. Practice. Tonight, practice gently releasing any fear that arises after making a request, acknowledging it calmly without alarm, and returning your attention to quiet trust. Chapter 17. The Nightly Ritual of Alignment. Reginald Thorpe began a brief and consistent nightly ritual of alignment, repeating the same simple steps each evening without significant variation, and found that the steady repetition of the ritual itself became every bit as powerful as any single practice contained within it. A brief and consistent ritual before sleep is precisely what keeps one continually aligned with the universe's own natural current, rather than drifting in and out of cooperation entirely by chance, as so many do without ever establishing any consistent practice of their own. Mabel Truscott practiced her own alignment only sporadically, taking it up enthusiastically for a few days before neglecting it for weeks at a time, and found her connection to this same current just as inconsistent and unpredictable as her own scattered effort had been. Consider the true value of consistency in maintaining your own nightly alignment, rather than approaching the practice only when convenient or when particularly motivated to do so. Practice. Tonight, assemble your own brief nightly ritual of alignment from the practices you have already learned, resolving to repeat it faithfully each night going forward. Chapter 18. Visualizing the Universe in Motion. Clarence Whitlock pictured, each night before sleep, in vivid and considerable detail, unseen forces quietly rearranging circumstances on his behalf, doors opening, paths clearing, people moving into position long before any outward sign appeared to confirm that any such rearranging was genuinely underway. Picturing the unseen universe already actively in motion, working diligently on one's behalf, even in the absence of visible proof, strengthens considerably the eventual and visible arrival of whatever has been sincerely requested. Sylvia Duquette requested her own desire sincerely enough, but never pictured anything actively happening on its behalf, leaving that unseen motion entirely unimagined, and found her own sense of possibility remaining faint and rather uncertain as a result of this omission. Consider whether you have been picturing the universe actively at work on your behalf, or leaving that important, unseen motion entirely unimagined, as Sylvia so often did. Practice. Tonight, visualize unseen forces quietly working on your behalf, picturing this activity in as much vivid detail as you can genuinely summon. Chapter 19. Gratitude as Proof of Receiving. Winifred Pemberton began closing each of her sincere requests with quiet and genuine thanks, offered as though the answer to that request were already fully hers, well before any outward sign had appeared to confirm it. Genuine gratitude offered in advance of any visible proof is treated by the universe as confirmation that its answer has already been accepted and received, hastening considerably what has been asked for into its eventual and visible form. Leonard Fitch withheld his own gratitude until visible proof finally arrived to justify it, unknowingly delaying, through this very withholding, the exact proof he so patiently and so anxiously awaited. Consider whether you have been waiting for proof to arrive before allowing yourself genuine gratitude, rather than allowing gratitude itself to lead the way toward what you desire. Practice. Tonight, offer a brief gratitude exercise for one request not yet visibly answered, speaking your thanks as though it were already simply true. Chapter 20. Greeting each day as already answered. Beatrice Langford discovered that the particular manner in which she greeted each morning expectant and open, or doubtful and closed, seemed to color the universe's response for the entire day that followed, shaping even unrelated matters with whatever tone she had carried from her very first waking moment. How one meets each morning determines whether one remains genuinely open to the universe's continuing response throughout the day, or quietly closes the door to it before the day has even properly begun. Roscoe Bellamy woke each morning already doubting his own sincere requests, rehearsing his uncertainty before his feet had even touched the floor, undoing in mere moments the careful alignment his nightly practice had labored so faithfully to build the evening before. Consider how you typically greet your own mornings, and what this habitual greeting may be quietly closing off, or warmly inviting in for the day that follows it. Practice. To close this second part of your journey, greet tomorrow as though your request has already been answered, before any other thought is permitted to intrude upon that quiet and deliberate moment. Act 3. Living as one the universe bends for. Chapter 21. The First Undeniable Signs. Silas Merriweather began noticing small coincidences appearing so frequently after his own sincere requests that he could no longer, in good conscience, dismiss them as mere and unrelated chance, however much his earlier skepticism might once have insisted otherwise. Small, repeated coincidences soon become genuinely impossible to dismiss as the universe's response grows steadily stronger and considerably more consistent, confirming, again and again, that something more than random chance is genuinely at work. Ophelia Rundgren continued waving away even these repeated and increasingly obvious signs, insisting to herself that each one was simply coincidence and nothing more, and so delayed the fuller and richer trust that would otherwise have strengthened her own results considerably. Consider whether you have begun noticing a pattern of small signs too consistent, too frequent, to be pure and unrelated accident any longer. Practice. Tonight, keep a brief note of any repeated signs you have noticed since beginning this practice, however small or seemingly ordinary they may appear. Chapter 22. Becoming Someone, the Universe Delights to Answer. Horace Pemberley stopped anxiously pleading with the universe for what he wanted, abandoning the desperate and repetitive begging that had characterized his earlier attempts, and began, instead, cultivating a quiet, trusting ease as his natural and habitual bearing, noticing his requests answered with increasing warmth and increasing speed as a direct result. The universe responds most readily to those who carry ease and trust as their natural and settled state, rather than desperation or constant demand. For ease itself is a kind of signal, just as surely as anxious pleading is. Prudence Alderman continued pleading anxiously with every request she made, her voice and her manner betraying constant desperation, and found her results remaining just as strained and just as disappointing as her own persistently anxious inner state. Consider whether your own bearing reflects genuine ease and trust, or anxious demand, as Prudence's so consistently did throughout her own practice. Practice. Today, cultivate one moment of quiet ease and trust, holding it gently as your natural and settled state, rather than straining toward it through further effort. Chapter 23. When Old Doubt Creeps Back In. Eugene Halloway, well along in his own sincere practice and genuinely encouraged by real progress, was surprised one particularly difficult week to find his old doubts about the universe's cooperation rising up again within him as strongly and as convincingly as they had ever been before his practice began. Even a steady and genuinely committed believer will meet the return of old doubt from time to time, and this is not failure, however discouraging it may feel in the moment of its return, but simply an old pattern surfacing once more to be gently released, exactly as it was released before. Henrietta Coswell mistook this same return of old doubt as certain proof that all her efforts had failed entirely, and abandoned her own practice in genuine discouragement, precisely at the moment when continued and patient practice would have carried her safely through to the other side of that same temporary doubt. Recognize the return of an old doubt, should it arise again within your own practice, as entirely ordinary and expected, rather than as any genuine defeat. Practice. Tonight, practice a brief, calming exercise for the moment old doubt about the universe's cooperation resurfaces, returning gently to trust without alarm. Chapter 24. The Universe's Own Timing. An old shipwright named Barnabas Cole understood, from a long lifetime spent among his timbers and his tools, that no vessel is ever completed before its proper and necessary season. However genuinely eager the merchant waiting anxiously for it might become in the meantime, the universe answers fully in its own perfect and unhurried timing, which rarely matches the timing anxiously demanded of it by the impatient seeker, and true trust requires genuine patience with this natural unfolding rather than insistence upon an artificial and premature schedule. Young Dorothea Linwood abandoned her own sincere request after only a few days, expecting an immediate answer that had not yet had time to properly develop, and so interrupted a process that had, in genuine truth, only just begun its own quiet and patient unfolding. Consider your own patience with the universe's timing, and whether you have expected an answer before its proper season has had any real chance to arrive. Practice. Tonight, offer yourself a quiet reminder, affirming patience with the universe's own unhurried and perfect timing. Chapter 25. Letting the Universe Handle the How. Frederick Aldous insisted, quite firmly, on dictating precisely how his own sincere request must be answered through this particular job, by this particular person, in this particular manner, and found himself repeatedly and genuinely frustrated when the answer he sought arrived instead by some entirely unexpected and unplanned path. Releasing the need to control exactly how a request will be answered allows far greater and often considerably better possibilities to unfold than the limited human mind alone could ever have designed or anticipated on its own. Sabina Winterbourne released her own insistence on one particular method of receiving what she sought, opening herself instead to whatever path the universe might choose, and found her request answered in a form more generous and more surprising than she had ever originally imagined for herself. Consider where you may currently be insisting on a particular how for your own request, rather than trusting the universe's own method to deliver something perhaps even better than what you had planned. Practice. Tonight, practice releasing your attachment to how one specific request will be answered, offering the details of its arrival freely to the universe's own wisdom. Chapter 26. The Ripple of an Aligned Life. Reginald Ashcombe noticed, over many months of his own deepening practice, that as his personal trust and ease grew steadily stronger, those closest to him, his wife, his children, his colleagues seemed, without any explanation he could readily offer, to grow calmer and more fortunate as well, as though his own alignment were somehow rippling gently outward to touch their lives too. As one's own alignment with the universe deepens through sincere and consistent practice, those within its reach often begin to shift in response as well. For this alignment radiates outward in ways considerably subtler than any word spoken or any action deliberately taken. Harriet Pemberton remained anxious and mistrustful, despite her own sincere outward efforts to help and encourage those around her, and wondered, with real puzzlement, why her spoken encouragement never seemed to take root in anyone she offered it to, however carefully she chose her words of comfort. Consider how your own deepening alignment may already be rippling outward to those nearest you, whether or not you have yet paused to notice it happening. Practice. Tonight, carry one calm, aligned feeling into your next interaction with another person, offering it quietly as your natural and settled presence. Chapter 27. When the Universe Redirects You. Aloysius Grant was deeply and genuinely discouraged when a long-awaited venture he had staked much hope upon collapsed entirely and seemingly without warning, only to find, some months later, that its very collapse had quietly redirected him toward a far greater opportunity than the one he had originally lost. An unwanted turn of events is often the universe quietly and deliberately redirecting the reader toward something considerably greater, rather than any genuine sign that their trust or their sincere effort has somehow failed. Beatrice Noloth resisted and resented an early and unwanted redirection so completely, and for so long, that she failed entirely to notice the greater path it had been quietly offering her the whole time, and so remained, for many discouraged months, exactly where that redirection had first left her. Consider a past unwanted turn of your own, and what genuine redirection it may have quietly carried within it, however painful that turn felt to you at the time. Practice. Tonight, reflect gently on one past redirection in your own life, and search patiently for the greater path it may have been quietly offering you all along. Chapter 28. Those the universe bent for before you. An old ship's captain named Barnaby Ellison possessed an uncanny ability to navigate seemingly impossible circumstances at sea, an ability his crew quietly attributed among themselves to some private and unspoken trust he carried, and never fully explained to anyone who sailed alongside him. Throughout the whole of history, quiet lives have been visibly and unmistakably shaped by this same cooperation with the unseen forces around them, leaving faint traces in old writings and family memory for those willing to look closely enough and patiently enough to recognize them clearly. A young descendant named Sophronia Ellison discovered her ancestor's private journal many years after his passing and recognized, with genuine and quiet astonishment, the very practices she had only recently learned herself, recorded there faithfully in his own careful hand many decades before her own birth. Consider what quiet, unexplained cooperation with the unseen may exist somewhere within your own family or community history, waiting patiently to be recognized in this new and clearer light. Practice. Tonight, reflect briefly on one such story from your own life or lineage, considering it now for the first time with fresh and deeper understanding. Chapter 29. Showing Others How to Ask. Clementine Ashworth gently showed a discouraged friend, one who had confided her own struggles and doubts, how to ask sincerely of the universe, offering feeling rather than mere words, offering trust rather than anxious demand, and found her own trust and her own results deepening considerably as she offered this same teaching to another. Helping another person learn to ask in this sincere and receptive manner deepens the teacher's own trust in the universe's faithful response, for what is shared with genuine sincerity becomes more firmly rooted within the one who shares it than it ever was before the sharing began. Ambrose Colfax kept his own understanding entirely to himself, sharing it with no one around him, and found his own progress growing strangely and rather inexplicably stagnant as a direct result of this quiet and persistent withholding. Consider whether there is someone in your own life you might quietly show how to ask in this same sincere and receptive way, offering them what has been so generously offered to you. Practice. Identify one person with whom you might gently share a single teaching from this book, offered simply and sincerely in your own words. Chapter 30. Living as One, with the Universe's Will. An aged Cornelius Wren found, across the whole span of a long and faithfully lived life, that asking and receiving had become so natural to him that he and the universe now seemed to move as one, without any deliberate effort required of him any longer to maintain that quiet and effortless cooperation. Once this cooperation is truly learned and genuinely lived across enough patient years, it ceases entirely to be effortful practice and becomes instead the natural rhythm of an aligned life, so that the universe continues, of its own accord, to bend gently and continuously in one's favor. A young seeker named Wilhelmina Ashgrove visited old Cornelius one quiet afternoon and asked him plainly the secret of his remarkable and quiet ease, only to be told simply that he no longer asks the universe for anything at all, for he and it have long since ceased, in any meaningful sense, to be separate from one another. Imagine your own future self, years from this very evening, for whom this cooperation requires no more conscious effort than the simple and natural act of breathing. Practice. To close this third and final part of your journey, envision your own life, years from now, having lived this cooperation so long that the universe simply meets you, gently and without resistance, exactly as you are. Epilogue. You now carry knowledge once known only to a rare few that the universe was never distant or indifferent toward you, only quietly waiting, patiently and without complaint, for you to learn its language of feeling and trust. What once seemed a cold and impersonal world, indifferent to your hopes and unmoved by your quiet longings, has revealed itself gradually across these teachings as something far warmer and far more responsive than you were ever taught to believe possible, Consider for a moment the distance already traveled from that first uncertain request, offered perhaps with real doubt still lingering beneath it, to this final and settled understanding you now hold quietly within you. Your own alignment has already begun its quiet work, faithfully and without complaint, whether or not outward proof has yet fully appeared before your waking eyes to confirm it. The universe is no longer something to hope at from a great and fearful distance, uncertain whether it hears you at all. It is a living presence, and you now know, surely and quietly, how to speak with it ready, from this moment forward, to bend gently and continuously in your favor, exactly as it has been waiting this whole time to do.